Are you worried about cyber war or cyber Pearl Harbor? How about sunspots or solar storms? High energy electromagnetic pulses, configure, the failure of AES, the length of your RSA key, counterfeit digital signatures on software, the vulnerability of the controls for our infrastructure, SCADA chaos. Worrying about more than one of these, or even any that are not in your specialty, may be a symptom of security hypochondria. In medicine, we define hypochondria as fear of a serious illness. However, it is not simple fear. It is fear that is disproportionate to the risk, fear that does not yield to expert reassurance. This anxiety is often debilitating. It sucks all the joy out of the victim's life. It may mask other symptoms or prevent diagnosis of real disease. This is not to say that these are not real risks. Some of them are even significant. The community, if not the enterprise, might even plan for them. However, their risk score tends to be a function of the magnitude of the consequences rather than high threat or even high vulnerability. Even for things like the infrastructure, where the vulnerability is much higher than it needs to be, our fear results from the potential consequences. For example, we're properly worried about our electrical infrastructure, in spite of the fact that it is not under attack. Because of the interdependence of our generating and distribution components, it is possible for failure or attacks on a few or even a single component to cascade across the grid. We've seen this most recently in August of 2006, but it has been the result of multiple component failures under load, not attack. While not as self-limiting as one might have hoped, these failures have been sufficiently orderly that we have recovered in tens of hours. Having lived through 3 outages of more than 3 days each in this year alone, as the result of physical and pervasive storm damage, I'll choose August 2006 anytime. In this last storm, some of my neighbors lived with uncertainty and without power, heat, running water, or even sewage for 8 days. Because of the connection of the electrical system controls to the public networks, they may be vulnerable to abuse or misuse from those that do not even need to know that they exist. There is speculation that such an attack by a nation state might be able to bring down the entire system for weeks to months. Some of this speculation comes from those who say, "I'm an expert, hear me roar." Richard Clarke walked around for years denying that he had ever even said, much less predicted, cyber Pearl Harbor. Similarly, there is speculation, not to say prediction, that solar storms can also burn up our grid and simultaneously fry all of our iPhones. I too am an expert, but I rarely say never. I frequently say rarely. Courtney liked to remind us that the magnitude of events are inversely proportional to their frequency. That is why we have scales like Richter for earthquakes, Saffir-Simpson for hurricanes, and the Fujita scale for tornadoes. These logarithmic scales reflect that the bigger the event, the more rarely it occurs. Of course, much of this disproportionate fear is driven by the media. The media teaches us that we are entitled to a risk-free environment. Remember that after the Northridge earthquake, the media moaned over the 5 raised roadways that collapsed, rather than the nearly 800 that did not. I hate to contemplate the cost of 800 roadways, none of which would fall in a Richter 7.0 quake. Similarly, the media prepares us for a repetition of the most recent event, even if the event was a once-in-a-generation, lifetime, century, or even millennium event. After Katrina, the new standard of readiness went from Saffir-Simpson 4 to Saffir-Simpson 5. After Fukushima, the new standard for nuclear power plants is now Richter 9.0 proof. Not resistant, but proof. Another word I rarely use. As expensive as remediating Fukushima is proving to be, it will be cheaper than building all plants to resist a Richter 9.0 earthquake followed by inundation. On the other hand, in the year after Katrina, the likelihood that Lafourche Parish would be brushed by any hurricane was still only 1 in 5. Category 5 still less than 1 in 50. The temptation to say that there would never be any plant struck by a Richter 9.0 earthquake followed by inundation from a tsunami is almost overwhelming. On the other hand, for most of us, on the ordered list of threats that we ought to plan for, it is at the bottom, with many other rare events, under the rubric Other. Over the weekend, I received intelligence analysis that said there are reports out of Oslo, Norway, that the Norwegian defense and energy enterprises were targets of an advanced persistent threat. It recommended no action. The sky is not falling. This intelligence changes nothing that we did not already know. It is not novel, not actionable, did not reach the tipping point. On the other hand, I take this as one more piece of evidence that all large enterprises are targets, that many are compromised, leaking critical intellectual property, that they are discovering it late, that running a flat enterprise network and relying on the perimeter is dangerous, that layering and compartmenting of our networks and data are urgent, and that identifying and isolating the most important enterprise IP is long overdue. Basics. Blocking and tackling. It's hard to talk about blocking and tackling to the guys who are buying and selling players, choosing markets, and building stadiums. Kipling cautions us, keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. It's difficult to tell our principals that we are working on urgent things when those are not the ones getting all the press and keeping them awake at night. However, that's what they pay us to do. When the sky is falling, they will not need us to tell them. Our principals look to us for wisdom, for balance, for proportionality. They look to us to tell them where to spend the next security dollar, not the last. That is why we are called professionals and are paid the big bucks.